This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca, and I am excited to bring back Reader Repartee today because we have not done this in quite a long time. And I have our good friend of the podcast, Zeralda, joining us today. And I should say, too, for those who have yet to hear one of these episodes, I'm going to ask Zeralda 5 questions about being a reader. And this is really kind of a fun thing to do because we get to learn a little bit about our friends and also usually get great reading suggestions along the way as well. So welcome, Zeralda.
Hi, happy to be here.
Good. Now, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? You don't have to go into great detail and spill any, stories. You could just give us a basic outline of who you are.
Sure, I'm Zeralda. Most of my friends call me Z. I live in South Louisiana, right outside the city of Lafayette. Everyone always asks, where is that close to New Orleans? Well, it's about 2 hours to the west of New Orleans. And I'm a Cajun, or as Canadians refer to, Acadian. My family all came either from Canada or through Canada before they ended up in Louisiana.
So is that how you kind of found our podcast, because we do Canadian literature?
Yes, because I'm very obviously drawn, especially to the eastern part of Canada.
Cool. That's great. All right. Well, let's get started. Our first question is one of my favorite ones, and it's interesting how often it's a very similar kind of answer, but I love asking it, which is, how did you become a reader?
Well, I became a reader in the womb. My mom was very much ahead of her time in the late 60s, and she would read to me while she was pregnant. And she said she would always, because she loved reading, and she grew up extremely poor, so books weren't something she had access to, more until she became an adult. And she tells me constantly that she would, sit there rubbing her belly with one hand and reading with another. And I've asked both my parents separately, like, oh, how old was I when I started reading? Because I've always been reading. And my dad said, as soon as you could speak, because it just never stopped. She read to me, and then I can remember, like, I wasn't even in kindergarten yet, and reading to her. She'd make me read back to her. So always, I've always been a reader. I guess I was listening to audiobooks before audiobooks was a thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because when I was a children's librarian years ago now, that was the thing they started saying was, make sure and read to your child, in the womb. And as soon as they're born, just read to them and it
Yeah.
will develop a readership.
And like I said, she was so ahead of her time.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I love that answer. And interestingly, I think in most of our cases for this episode, it's their mother that got them to read. So shout out to all the moms out there who are really creating great readers among all of us. We love that about moms. All right, second question. What book do you wish you could read again for the first time?
I don't think I have one specific book. I tend to reread books all the time, and obviously they never hit quite the same as they did the first time. But I kind of like that. I've never been one to go backwards. And I kind of feel like trying to get that feeling again is like kind of going backwards. So I enjoy reading them again and seeing what's changed and why. Is it because I'm older? Is it because I've had more life experiences? Do I just have a better understanding? So I can't really, I don't know. If I'm rereading it to get that feeling again, I remember the feeling, which is why I'm usually reading it again. So I can't say one specific book.
So how often when you reread something, are you enjoying that process? Like, is it rarely that you reread something and you go, wow, why did I like this book so much?
Sometimes.
Really?
Sometimes. And then sometimes I'll reread something and, going, wow, I liked it so much better the second time than I did the first time. And I also just think, and I don't know if it comes with age or because I have read it before, I find that when I'm rereading it, I'm paying more attention. And I'm like, oh, I didn't catch that the first time. And it's like, did I catch it because I was reading too fast or I was just not in a point in life to understand it?
There are a handful of books that I definitely want to go back and reread, because I think once you know sort of like where the book is headed, that's when you can find maybe those little pieces of the story that speak to you, because you're not waiting to figure out what happens, right? That you can kind of really focus more on exactly what the author is saying and how they're saying it.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well, and also I tend to forget a lot of the books after I read them. So then I go like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened, you know, and
I think that is I think that happens a lot, because I've heard a lot of people where they'll say they'll start reading a book and they'll go, "Oh, wait a minute, I think I've read this before." And I think it's kind of funny. That's why I keep track of everything, because I'm not a fast reader, so to me, I don't want to waste time rereading something. It
exactly.
is if I don't realize that that's what it is that I'm doing. So, yeah, that's funny. Okay. Now, which author, living or dead, would you like to meet in person, and why?
Well, I actually got to meet the author, and that was Anne Rice.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and it taught me that I'm not good at meeting people I admire. I started reading Anne Rice when I was a teenager, and I was just like, I'm a huge vampire lover, and she kind of really set the blueprint for me. So I'm extremely picky about my vampires. Like, you know, I'm like, they need to be by a certain old fashioned code, I guess. I'm not into this walking around in the daylight and they're sparkling and stuff. But gosh, a few years ago, it's when she hadn't put out a book in a long time in the vampire series, and Prince Lestat was the title that came out, and she and her son did a book signing in New Orleans, and so a good friend of mine who's also a fan, we went, and I mean, when I tell you the crowds, it was just like, you know, she just had this awesome following. And we're standing in line, we're like, we can see her, and I'm all excited, giddy like a little kid in a candy shop. And the you know, so you're chatting with the people around you, and one lady says, she goes, "Ooh, what are you gonna say to her?" And I kind of just panicked, and I was like, "Oh my god, I have to talk to her." And like I just froze, and literally my conversation with her was hi, thank you, and goodbye,
Oh.
because I was just like, I was so, oh my god. My friend on the other hand, she just was like, you know, telling her all these things. And while I'm extremely happy that I got to meet her, it's just like, I know in my personality, like, I'm not really good with meeting people that I admire, because it just, yeah, I just got too tongue tied. Years ago, I actually, there was a group, Matchbox 20, that had come to Lafayette, and I actually ran into the lead singer, and which I enjoyed, but I was like, it didn't phase me. And one of my friends said, only you would be starstruck by an author instead of like a rock star, you know. So
I would be the same way, because my favorite author is Sarah Pretsky. I love her so much. I love her books. I love her writing. I love her politics. I love everything about her. And I saw her in the Bay Area years ago, and I purposely got in line last, because I thought, I don't want anyone behind me to rush me, because I just want to have this one experience with her. So, and her mother was a librarian. So I waited in line, and I was just freaking out the whole way. And then I finally got up to her, and I told her I was a librarian. She loves librarians. She always, credits us and everything, which is great. And I got to have like an actual mini conversation with her, which I've never forgotten. And it was like the greatest experience. Now, flash forward all these years that we're doing podcasts, right? I am sometimes so tongue tied with authors. I'm so in awe that you can't tell it, I think, generally on the podcast, but sometimes I am sweating. I'm like panicking. I'm just, you know what I mean? It's true. I would get way more freaked out by an author than I would ever probably anybody else, an actor or anything else.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, because they build these worlds that we, you know, we just dive into and become immersed with, and it's like, oh wow.
Yeah. And it's also a talent that, I mean, we all can write, but they write so beautifully. And I always think to myself, I don't even know how to play an instrument or sing. So like that's not even within my wheelhouse, right? But with an author, I feel like, well, I can write, but they take it to a level that I just go, I
Yeah.
wish I had that skill set.
I had a friend once said like, "Oh, you have a voice, so you can sing," and I was like, "Yes, technically I can sing. That doesn't mean I should." You
That's
know,
true.
and it's kind of the same with writing. Yeah, I mean, we can all write, but should we?
Exactly. Okay. Our next question is, what fictional character would you like to meet and why?
That would probably be Ruth from Louise Penny's Three Pines series. I don't know, I have a soft spot for characters that come off gruff and crotchety, but deep down they're really very softies and like very kind. They're really kind, caring people, but they just have this like hard veneer, and that's Ruth. And I mean, she's such a lovable curmudgeon.
Okay, now I've never read any of the series, so tell me who Ruth is and is she in every book and who is she? Like
Yeah,
what's
she's one of the main characters that live in Three Pines. She's this old lady. She's portrayed as a drunk. I don't think she really is a drunk. She is the poet, like, of Canada. She's like world renowned, but you wouldn't know it because she kind of lives in this little shack. But everybody puts up with her because, again, deep down, she's really a great person. But she has no problems calling people names or, calling them numb nuts and stuff like that. Yeah, she's just a great character. She has a pet duck, Rosa.
I love it. So where would you go and what would you do? Would it just be coffee? What would you do if you met her?
Oh gosh. Well, I guess she pretty much dictates what you do. So, I mean, she's also like head of the volunteer fire department, and she instructs like the curling team. So I'd probably be like, I'd want to hang out with her on the curling team because I like curling.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's cool. All right, love that. Okay. Now, our last question is just what are you currently reading?
I am reading a lot of things. I'm doing two book read-alongs on Substack. One is the Iliad, which I actually read when I was younger, and Anna Karenina, which I have never read, and I'm surprised that I'm really enjoying it. I mean, it's basically a Russian soap opera from the 1800s, but I'm like, I just can't get over like how entertaining it is. I'm enjoying it way more than the Iliad. And personally, I always have a fiction and a nonfiction going.
Okay.
My fiction is The Last Ranger by Peter Heller. He also wrote The River and The Guide. He's got a whole bunch of books.
I think that's the author that Tara really, really likes. I think
Yeah,
that's one of
she's
hers.
mentioned
Yeah.
him before. I'm drawn to the last few years. I'm drawn to books that have a heavy feature. Nature is featured, and like he's a park ranger, much in the way that Paul Doiron has a series about a park ranger in Maine. And it's like I'm just because there's mysteries and there's stuff to solve, but I mean, nature is like the main character of it. My nonfiction is a book I've had on my shelf for a while, and I finally decided to read it because February is Black History Month and March is women, so it bleeds into it. It's Master, Slave, Husband, Wife by, I'm probably not going to pronounce the name correctly, Ilyon Wu. It's Ilyon, and the last name Woo. It's the true story of William and Eliza Craft, who escaped slavery by running away and posing. They were a married couple, but they posed as master and slave because she was what they called back then a quadroon, so she passed for white. And so she disguises herself as a man, and her husband is her. So I've just started that, and it's really interesting. And it's funny because right before that, I had just read Frederick Douglass's of Bondage and Freedom. I probably have that wrong, the correct wording. And he mentions that when he's talking about his escape, he said, I can't do what the Crafts did because, once it came knowledge, apparently they were like, oh, so you got to watch out for these people that are pretending to be something they're not. And I'm listening. I also usually do an audio book. It's called Cabin. Cabin, Off the Grid Adventures of a Clueless Craftsman by Patrick Hutchison. And it's been very interesting. It's about this guy who, once he graduated college, was still just like, what the heck am I going to do with my life? And he stumbles on this cabin, takes place like in the Pacific Northwest. And it's just his adventures or misadventures of restoring this cabin,
Ooh.
which is basically a shack from the way he describes it.
Oh, that sounds like something I would really enjoy for sure.
I think you would. It's very interesting.
Wow.
So
You've given us a lot of great titles that I've not heard of before. I love that. We love to add to our TBR. So anything else you want to add as a finally a member of the Reader Repartee Club?
No, I enjoy reading. I enjoy the podcast because I get a lot of ideas from y'all. So it's great to be able to contribute in some way.
Awesome. Well, thank you. You certainly have done that. So thanks, Zeralda, for joining us. And everyone else, happy reading.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.